Hi, I'm Shan Wu with a Undercolor of Law hot take on two questions that have come up a lot, both in the comments here as well as generally on social media. And that's the question of, first, whether or not the election was stolen, and two methods for that. The first is the idea that there was some sort of massive fraud that took place. And then second, not really stolen, but the second point is whether Trump is disqualified from taking office. So I'm going to address both of those. So first, on the stolen point, there are usually an A and B theory on that. The first is that, first, I want to say something. I'm not going to call these conspiracy theories, and there's a reason I'm not going to do that, which we'll talk about a little bit later. People have legitimate questions and concerns, and we should talk about them and try to answer them when we can. Theory A is that there are millions of missing votes. Theory B is the idea that Elon Musk was somehow involved in affecting the election results by using his Starlink satellite system. So first, let's talk about the missing votes concern. Most of this actually arises from early vote counts, which were not complete. And actually, the true tallies take much longer than we think they do, much longer than I had suspected too. So for example, California, I think most of us know, takes weeks and weeks to complete their tallying and counting. Even at the end of November, the final numbers were not necessarily done yet. But as the numbers have come in, we have seen that Trump's margin of victory in terms of the numbers of votes, the popular vote, has steadily decreased in terms of his popular vote. I mean, it certainly completely undermines his kind of ludicrous notion, oh, this is a landslide, huge mandate. It's important to call that out because it's a bunch of BS. I mean, he did not have a landslide. That's not even the definition of a landslide. And he really barely won the popular vote. But what's important to talk about here is the idea that there's not millions of votes missing. So we'll take a look at a more recent CNN analysis or article, and I'll quote from it, and we'll put it up for you. And the quote is, comparing the two elections, Donald Trump added about 2.8 million votes to his total in his 2024 victory versus the 2021. Vice President Kamala Harris, on the other hand, underperformed by about 6.8 million votes compared with Joe Biden's performance in 2020. And that's according to analysis that CNN did as of November 25th. So first of all, notice how long it took to get to that analysis. You can't do it really fast. So that addresses the question of the missing votes, and it's pretty easy to check this on the internet. There are a lot of different sources have talked about this theory, including Al Jazeera and AP. All sorts of folks have reported on the fact that there's not really millions of missing votes, and those early numbers were mostly a result of the early counting. The counting hadn't been finished yet. So, theory B, the Elon Musk theory. This theory comes from the concern over Musk's Starlink satellite system, as well as a pretty compelling, persuasive analysis put forth about bullet voting by one election expert who had written about this. It's kind of compounded by the fact that Joe Rogan had boasted that Musk had a secret app that was able to determine the winner hours before anyone had declared the winner. So when you put that all together, I mean, it obviously raises a lot of question marks and concerns. But let's deal with the satellite issue first. Now, so it's very easy for people to dismiss people's concerns about this as, oh, this is just like a crazy version of the Italian satellite nonsense that the Trump campaign had pushed for years. And that theory, as well as some others, basically destroyed Rudy Giuliani's remaining reputation as well as his personal fortune. This is a little bit different because actually Musk does have an extensive satellite system which is very powerful. I mean, it affects world commerce, it affects international relations, it even affects military issues like in Ukraine, and Taiwan has talked to him about this, as has China. So he does have a very powerful, extensive satellite system, and I think it's very dangerous for a private contractor to be controlling this. But the fact that he has that does not establish that there's a nexus between that system and interfering with the election. So how do we know that? So if we take a look at this, first you have to remember that voting machines are not directly connected to the internet. We don't have an internet voting system. I mean, maybe that would be good to do, but we don't. And that's easy to validate through any number of resources. Second, there's a pretty extensive, comprehensive network of local as well as federal officials watching for suspicious activity, such as hacking into the machines. Did someone secretly try to connect them to the internet? And that just has not come up. The mysterious Joe Rogan reference to the Musk app, a little bit more troubling, but perhaps not for the reasons that initially come to mind. So first, Musk is certainly the kind of person, it seems to me, who would brag about having designed this super smart app that predicts things ahead of time. It is, however, going to be a predictive app, right? I mean, maybe he came up with a good predictive app based on certain information, but we don't know. And what's troubling about it is when you put it together with the theory about the so-called bullet voting theory that was put together by Spoonamore. And what he's saying is that there was an abnormally high amount of bullet voting. And what that is where in the presidential election, there's only a vote, in this case, only for the president, but they don't vote for like Senate or any down ballot issues. That's the definition of bullet voting. So that's tied into the possibility that Musk might have affected this strategically. So we'll address the bullet voting analysis in a moment. But on the Musk point, what concerns me is what was he doing with all the data he collected in his bogus lottery system? Remember that giveaway? We're going to give away $1 million prize to people who signed this petition and such. No question he was doing something with that data. That wasn't initially obvious, but it's really clear now when you look at it because of the information he was getting from people. And given the people that are signing that petition, it's certainly possible he could extrapolate a decent predictive model based on who's actually voting, who's supposed to vote, and the turnout in the particular jurisdictions. But again, taking the step from that to an actual illegal intervention in the election just requires a step that we don't have any evidence for. It certainly does call into question his use of that lottery, and I think that one thing that should be done in the future is to strengthen the rules and laws against what he was doing, because at the very least, to me, it looked like it was an illegal campaign contribution. It was kind of like buying people's votes in a common sense way. So that's something that should come out of this, to really look at how that was being used. Now, the other point is that when we talk about Rogan quoting Musk and this mysterious app, again, there have been people debunking this notion of him being able to use Starlink to accomplish this. And so let's turn to the bullet voting theory. The numbers right now really aren't bearing that theory out. Since the votes have come in, this notion that was an extremely anomalous amount of the bullet voting it just isn't clear right now. It's also not so clear to me exactly what kind of a system you use to determine the bullet voting. And there's a good Substack analysis of that, which is, again, you can kind of guesstimate that maybe by comparing the total amount of votes cast for like the Senate votes versus the presidential votes, but not that clear to me in looking that over, and if you look it over too, that there really is such a huge and odd situation with much more bullet voting than before. So take a look at those resources, because the bullet voting idea is persuasive, but you really have to look at how the numbers have come in. Now, something that's really important to understand is that it's very hypocritical of Musk, for one thing, when he's complaining about how everything should be done by paper. To debunk this theory about the Starlink connection, you have to remember 98% of all the votes are on paper ballots. And so we can take a look at this link from WABC News reporting it. And one of the questions here, and this was put out by a Florida FAQ section 2, it's very common. So the question is there a paper trail? Yes. Your paper ballot is secured in the ballot box. That's the official record of the votes, and it's available for recounts or audits. How long is it kept? Any ballots with federal races issues must be retained for 22 months. Others are kept for 12 months. So there is a paper backup record. So the idea that there could be a big disconnect between electronic versions versus the paper, that really isn't borne out. Also, as I think I mentioned before, the voting machines aren't really connected to the internet. That is a key safeguard in making sure that they're difficult to hack in terms of internet access during the voting process. Could it be hacked? Yeah, sure. I mean, it's possible someone could hack into the machine and connect it to the internet. But even the optical scanners, that's the ones where you fill out the ballot that kind of looks like a standardized test, they still keep those paper ballots to compare if there's any question. And as one expert says, the only wires going into those are basically the plugs for power. It's the power cord. And that kind of air gapping protection from the internet really should be keeping it safe from any connection to the internet. So that's the sort of electronic concerns about getting into the election results. And then we'll turn briefly to the idea that some people ask, isn't Trump just barred constitutionally by the 14th Amendment because he was an insurrectionist? Main answer to that is the Supreme Court said no, unfortunately. There were a number of cases trying to disqualify Trump from the ballot. They failed, and mostly because the Supreme Court weighed in on that point. Now, they didn't have to weigh in. I wrote an article in the Daily Beast pointing out that they should just, kind of keep their noses out of it because their big concern was uniformity. They didn't want a whole bunch of different states having different versions of who could be on the ballot. But you know something? They were fine with that when it comes to a woman's right to choose, her control of her own body. Let all these states have different ideas. We need to step back and assess, what is the Supreme Court supposed to do? They're supposed to decide constitutional issues. They'll need to be balancing what they think is the right result politically, what's the good of the country, what kind of uniformity is going to have. Just decide the constitutional issue. If they're really putting the facts into the law machine and just turning the crank, that's the kind of result that you would get. So they really just should have kept their noses out of this. What we can take away from this is that as the numbers come in, it turns out the margin was very close for Trump's win. And that's the real problem, right? It shouldn't have been close. It's an aberration that anyone like him could be elected, much less that there are millions of Americans who fall for this authoritarian type of approach. It's not a question of saying, oh, a bunch of young males were all voting for him, they're all listening to Joe Rogan, they're idiots. It's not the solution to censor Joe Rogan. We need to have an alternative to that type of echo chamber. We need to have our own echo chamber. Don't shy away from the idea that it's an echo chamber. It's collaboration, it's putting the truth out. And I think a great quote from AOC about the echo chamber idea was that a extreme right echo chamber just won the last election. So let's remember that. So thanks again for the comments, really helpful, and talk to you soon.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.